I'm very pleased, honored to be able to launch this year's 2023 European Women in VC report, which is going to talk about achieving superior returns with gender diversity. And to launch the report, I have the pleasure of inviting a distinguished panel of speakers. Marjut, Falkstedt, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the European Investment Fund.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Erik Balck Sørensen, who is the Chief Investment Officer of the Danish National Fund of Funds, AFO. And Thomas Kristensen, who is a senior partner at LGT Capital, based in Switzerland, and managing 90 billion of assets.
90 billion assets. That's a word.
Sit down.
Please have a seat. Now, in order for us to have a bit more of a discussion about our topic of today, I wanted to do a bit of a backdrop about the findings of the 2023 report. And with that, let me just launch the report. So who's European Women in VC? Well, European Women in VC is a community of senior VC professionals coming from all parts of Europe. These are the founding members, but we are working with over 50 funds and institutions with a mission to open up, build, and strengthen relationships between the venture and the LP ecosystem. In terms of the research of 2023, IDC, who we commissioned the analysis to, has analyzed over 500 VC funds. And they come from 31 countries. So that's the EU 27 and 4 more. They found that 16% of partners are female, but women only manage 9% of assets under management. And also, we looked at the shareholdings of the general partnerships. What we found was that 25% of general partners today in Europe have a shareholding of the VC, but what we also found is that the general partner title can sometimes be misleading. Unfortunately, 10% of people with a general partner title, meaning both male and female, are not real general partners. They don't have pre-allocated carry, and they don't have ownership of the management company. And this is how we define a general partner. Now, why is all of this important? Why is the composition of decision-making teams important? Well, it's important because IDC's regression analysis of 100 funds showed that for each 10 percentage points increase in the representation of women on the decision-making level, there is an associated 1.3% increase in the IRR. There is also an impact in volatility of fund returns. Mixed teams tend to be less volatile, which is something that many LPs very much appreciate. And with that, what kind of a future are we looking at? Well, 47% of VC respondents believe that there will be a movement to find more diverse and more female fund managers over the next 5 years. However, they believe that these new managers will have access to carry and to decision-making, but not necessarily to the GP shares. And what about LP relationships? What are these interactions like? Well, 81% of respondents have said they meet at least one woman from an LP institution. However, only 25% of those they meet have real allocation, final decision-making power. We also looked at types of LPs. And here, clearly the National Fund of Funds and the supranational institutions are in the lead. They're working very hard to ensure their teams are mixed and making a fair representation of who they invest in. We're a little bit behind in terms of pension funds especially, where only 20% of decision makers are women. This is, of course, important for new managers coming to market because LP-GP relationships are long-term and investment is relationship-driven. Therefore, what we need to solve for is how can we allow these new, interesting, innovative managers to come to market and build these relationships faster so that they can then invest in companies that are really solving for the biggest challenges that we're facing today. Is diversity important for the venture space? Yes, it is. For managers, it seems to be a key point of making decisions. They believe that a mixed team is better at looking at products and solutions of the future and delivering potentially a better return. Is, however, that mixed team important for LP interactions? Well, only 29% believe that is the case. Are diversity strategies in the portfolio important? Yes, they are. And this is, I believe, a key slide because it's really the LP cascading effect that can change the entire ecosystem. With more focus on ESG, and especially the S and the G components, we can do really a lot. And as you can see from this slide, the vast majority of LPs are aligned with this mission. And with that, I want to thank IDC for this amazing analysis. But first of all, I want to thank all our partners that have made this possible. You can see that there are international, national institutions, corporations, funds, and ecosystem partners, everyone aligned with this mission, as my distinguished speakers of today are.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. And I'd like to switch over to the discussion. I would like to ask you, Marjut, first, if I may, what are your impressions of this analysis and what is happening today on the venture space?
Thanks, Kinga. And my first comment would be that thank you for raising awareness. I think this is the start, to raise awareness by all stakeholders in the venture capital, in the entrepreneurial space. Because when we look at the population, it's kind of half-half women and men, isn't it? And in a good decision making, in order to increase their creativity and innovative mind, you need all parts of the population. And so not only venture capital, but also in the entrepreneurship. So why I think it's important, it's to target different, not only venture capital, but also the manner how we create companies, how we educate people in order to create companies. This is all a kind of a sequence of events on which we have to work all together and raise awareness. And then, of course, investors, because of investors, ESG, environmental, social, and governance standards. It's not only about environmental climate, it's about social, and it's about good governance. And good governance means good decision making, taking into account all views. So that's why, also in venture capital, diversity and gender diversity is something that we have to continue pursuing and raising awareness much more.
Thank you, Marjut. Thomas, if I can switch to you for also the pan-European view on this.
Yeah, can everyone hear? Because I could barely hear you. But everyone else is fine? Speak louder. Okay,
louder.
Sorry, I found it
You have
difficult.
to speak louder. Okay.
Sorry. I think you said it's a long journey. I think that's very true. I come from a place where the fund that I manage, we look at returns. That means risk return is what we seek to optimize. And sadly, in order to assess the risk of something, you have to look at what they've done before. And in venture, it takes 10 to 15 years to know if you're any good at it. And it means that there were very few women in European and global VC 10 to 20 years ago, and therefore there's not many of them with a great track record today. And that's a problem. So I think it becomes the responsibility of asset allocators to try to push their fund managers to maybe go beyond the obvious and trying to create more diverse teams. I think gender is obviously very important, but I think diversity is many things. And the only way you really get to optimize that, in my opinion, is if you start thinking about what's optimal decision making. And optimal decision making in a modern, smaller world is where you include as many different points of views as possible.
Yes.
And different points of view comes from different people with different backgrounds and perceptions of the world. And I think we're trying to encourage our managers to include more women in their teams. But you have to be very careful how hard you push it. We're talking about teams of typically 3 to 5 people. If you introduce someone new in that, it can take a long time to adjust and find a new balance among that team. So you have to move very, very slowly in order to make sure or avoid risks. And so I think it's an extremely complicated topic. There needs to be capital allocated to encourage this and go a little bit further out the risk curve in terms of having funds with less track record, quite frankly. That's necessary if we want to accelerate this. And then you need people like us to accept that diversity can actually enhance your decision making. And I think your data shows it, right? And if I look at our own portfolio in Europe, I think 3 of the 7 best firms are women-led or women-dominated, in a good way. But I think it takes time. There are a few that have been on the journey for a long enough time. The ones that have done phenomenally well. And I'm quite positive and encouraged. I think we'll get there. But expecting it to happen next year is unfortunately not realistic.
I agree with you that we need more data points. We need a longer history. And this research is, of course, a start of a discussion. We hope that in a couple of years, we will have maybe responses from 500 funds about performance. Right now, we're at 100, and I would really like to encourage everyone to contribute. And another point of yours, Thomas, I think is a little bit related to the point we had in the presentation, which was about labeling, titles, pinkwashing, people tokenizing women in funds for many, many occasions. So these are things that we need to think about as LPs do due diligence. If I may switch to Erik for a Nordic view, and Nordics are always considered one of the most, well, gender and diversely inclusive societies. How do you see that in venture here?
Well, thank you. And that's how we see ourselves, for sure. This is such an important topic, and we need to not just start talking about it, but also louder. We need to start talking louder about it. I'll try to do that. And also to put action behind the words. Because I'll give you a practical example. And I believe that everybody who works within our business recognizes that the amount of talent out there in the market is scarce. So it seems obvious for us to expand the talent pool, not just to address the boys club, as you mentioned in your slides, but to address the whole market. And the only way to start addressing the whole market is to change the way we think about how we address the market. So it is of both mathematical and practical importance that we start addressing the female side of the market, that we start talking differently and inviting women into our community, both from an investor perspective, but certainly also from a founder perspective. We live in an ecosystem where founders and investors look at each other and start mirroring each other. Mm-hmm. So if we don't make sure that we attract female investors, we won't see a lot of female founders coming in at the other end of the ecosystem. So this is such an important agenda, and there are actually small ways of starting to really address this out there, and I believe that we in the Nordics and certainly we as you know a sovereign player, that we have an important role in this, basically paving the way for everybody else and starting to do things differently.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. We once looked at what happens with angel deals. And, well, that's actually to do also with track record. What kind of founders or investors get invited into angel deals and who calls whom? Well, what happens usually when there is like a top deal and you have to make a decision super quickly? One, usually man, is interested in investing and he will call his other male colleagues.
Yeah.
We asked a couple of them, why don't you call women colleagues? I mean, they are also experts in given fields. And, you know, it's a natural thing. It just doesn't spring to their mind. It's just one of those things that I think we have to solve for, also to build track record. It would be great if we were inclusive also in these endeavors. I think that's a great starting point. If I could go back, Marjut, to your point on ESG. This is big on the agenda today in Europe and slowly moving into the UK as well. And hopefully is going to become more and more prominent as we go along. How can this ESG scenario fit well into the due diligence processes of LPs?
I think it's a good question, and I'm not sure I have the right answer. But what I would like to see is that the investors and the limited partners, when they are looking into an investment into a fund, indeed include the question, is there in the management team a female partner? Is there a plan? Does this fund, for example, have a plan for succession or for diversity, like we have a plan on climate? So it's part of, indeed, becoming part of the due diligence process. Now, we are a fund of fund in the EIF, and we asked the question to the fund managers, you know, whether these things are in place. And we also have a program called Empowering Equity, where we try to enhance and raise awareness, but also invest better and support diverse teams. And when we do this, I'm also sure that other limited partners, you know, join us in this endeavor, because it's only the fact that we join forces. We can start as a public institution doing this, but others can follow us. We are investing together with the private sector, of course. So, public starts. We are showing the way a bit, and the others can certainly follow in helping developing diverse teams, and in particular, bring it so far that founders start thinking about it and understand that for the next raising of funds, it might not be that easy, in particular when you come and talk to EIF, for example.
And Erik, what is it like on the Nordic and Danish scene?
Well, just to follow up, let's be honest, 5 years ago when we tried to discuss with GPs the issue of diversity, it was a really awkward conversation. Mm-hmm. And nobody really understood why it was important and why it was at all relevant. Because, you know, you would focus on returns, and you would focus on the business plan, and you would focus on the portfolio diversification and so on. And the good news is that now there's an increased acceptance of a dialogue, of us bringing it up, insisting on the importance of not just awareness, but also, as Marjut said, there needs to be a succession plan. You need to start thinking differently about how you compose your team, and how you compose your team certainly in the long run. Mm-hmm. So there is an increased acceptance, and we have to insist and continue to insist on the dialogue. It's not an easy dialogue. I completely acknowledge that. It's not an easy dialogue, but it's a dialogue that we need to have, and we need to start pushing even further to see how these issues of succession, of diversity in general is addressed in whatever plan we are presented with from a fund. So and that is something that we are now including into our due diligence processes, into any dialogue that we have with our fund managers or with potential fund managers. It doesn't change overnight. It's important to make that absolutely clear that if we believe that we can just walk out into the market and start making clear demands of changing things from one day to the next, that's not the way the dynamics works either. But we can obviously change the thinking of a fund if we start addressing the issue sort of 4 or 5 years in advance. So that's how we approach it now, that whenever we are in dialogue with a fund, whenever we are doing a due diligence on a fund, we tell them, listen guys, this is something that you have to have a different approach to when you come to us in 3-4 years from now and start raising your next fund.
Yeah, I think you picked up on a super important topic, which is succession, which is one of those things coming up in Europe now with the largest funds. But I can see that Thomas wants to add to.
No, I actually think this is happening and has been happening on a smaller scale than we all want. But if I think, again, some of the better firms we're invested with, whether it's Europe or the US, you can see now in the partner group that there was a dedicated effort having women enter the firm at relatively junior positions because it is an apprenticeship business. And you're in a situation now where there are a few firms, they should remain unnamed, but who've got extremely strong and very diverse partner groups.
Yeah.
And you can see now that the ones that have not had it top of mind are getting the questions from yourselves, from us as well, clearly, right? But I think the urgency is increasing because there have actually been some really smart people who've thought about this 5 to 10 years ago, and they're now effectively the role model that all of the other GPs want to follow. You always need role models in this, right? And I think now you have quite a few, especially female role models in Europe. And they haven't come by chance, right? They've earned it and it's been super tough. But it will take, 5 to 10 years before you reach parity, unfortunately. But that's the way I think the world works.
Just to pick up on that, Thomas, since you're an investor in the US and in Europe, do you see that the US is more advanced in terms of succession planning? Do they have ready-made models for this that we could adopt here?
No.
No.
No, I think, again, when you're talking about succession planning in a VC firm, right, it's a small group of people. For us, where it takes 10 years to have a generational transition in a private equity or venture capital firm. Because it's people that work in small teams day to day, make very critical decisions, and it's a lot about personal interactions and understanding the unsaid discussion that teams have, right? And I don't think that there are outliers in all geographies and countries, but I don't think the US is necessarily further ahead. I think, if anything, this is probably where Europe is a little bit further ahead as an industry. There's a lot of focus on, especially diversity, more broadly in the US. I think from there it comes from maybe a more litigious standpoint, which I don't think we should get into that discussion. But I think from here it comes from a values perspective. Sometimes my impression is elsewhere it comes more from a, pardon my French, cover your ass perspective. Mm-hmm. And I think we're coming at it from the right side, just to be clear.
It's always good to hear that Europe is ahead. Marjut.
So to add to what Thomas was saying is that, Europe has 27 member states and many regions. We are here in the Nordics. We're talking about parental leave and, all these type of things is so normal. It's not normal in other countries. And, for men and women alike kind of having this type of parity. So in European Union, we have still a lot to do in certain parts. And other parts are really well, not really well, better developed. And now I'm looking at both of you, basically. So it's good that we talk about this here in the Nordics. We also have to talk about this in the South and in the East.
And in addition to that, because I couldn't agree more, we also need to expand the perspective into not just venture, but also certainly growth and buyout. Because we're actually much further ahead in venture compared to buyout. And it just needs to happen. We've set the wave in motion, and we need to start seeing something happening as well.
Indeed. Now, a TechBBQ conference wouldn't be the same if we didn't speak about market conditions for fundraising for at least a couple of minutes. Thomas, tell us what you see today.
I don't think it's ever been easy to raise funds, especially if you're at it early on in your career. You need to tell a story that people buy, and we all have different backgrounds and biases. So I think it's always been difficult. Right now, I think it's very, very difficult, especially for teams that don't have 10, 15-year track records. I always it's not a popular opinion, I guess, but the way I think about it is if you raise $100 million venture capital fund, the fee structure is such that over a period of the following 10 years, you will have somewhere between 15 to $20 million of guaranteed income just on management fees. That's a lot of money. And I know it doesn't go to one person, but still, if you split it out over a few, it's a lot of money. And my view is you kind of have to earn it to get there. And everyone who has it and then now are further away have earned it, by the way. Clearly, some have had an easier path than others. But so I believe it should be difficult. We're talking about when we invest into a fund, right? We effectively give people a commitment to fund them for $10 million or whatever the amount is over the next 10 years. And we say, good luck, take care of it. It's a gigantic responsibility, and you need to build trust. And in a market like we've had, everyone looks like rock stars. Now we're having a reset, and some actually did well through that, others less so. So it is difficult. It's very difficult right now. I think it seems extremely discouraging for some. I think it should be difficult, but I would also encourage people to think about the perspective of the LP. If you want to go out and raise a fund, we need to trust you, and you need to build up credibility. The ones that do it, and I met a good friend, GP of mine, around here just before. He's sadly a man, but it took him 4 years to raise his first fund.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just a stupid joke. But it took 4 years to raise that fund. And he had a fund of $7 million for the first 2.5 years. It was tough. He was grinding. The reason we came in at the end of it was just because he just has sheer willpower to make it work. And obviously there was a personal situation that made that possible. That's another discussion that I'm very aware that we don't all have the same backgrounds. Sorry, I digressed.
Thank you for that answer. As the market has slowed down, does that mean that public funded institutions need to speed up their investment processes, or is that the same as always?
For us, it's super important to stay engaged in the market. So although we do see some of the same tendencies, we also remain sort of cautiously optimistic actually about the market. There are still a number of great startups out there, which means that for the fund managers to navigate in a market that hasn't completely slowed down, we actually still see opportunity. But it's clear that we are seeing some of the funds struggling to get started. We are seeing sort of different models being tried out in order to see if they can raise probably in 6 to 9 to 12 months from now. For us, we have a special role, not just in seeking out experienced managers and moving on to the next fund, but also in supporting sort of the emerging part of the fund manager scene. Mm-hmm. So we are still engaging in both parts of the market. We are still making investments into also emerging managers and in particular with when we're talking about diverse teams. I mean, we've made a couple of investments into into diverse teams, emerging teams, fund managers over the past 12 months, and we will continue to do so. But that's easy for us because there's strong support, there's strong political support as well for us to stay as a state-owned fund, to stay active in the market. So we remain we have I would say a cautiously optimistic outlook on how the market will evolve in the coming couple of years.
And Marjut, of course, you know that there are many emerging managers coming to market, and the first port of call is usually EIF. What are you seeing today, and can we speed up decision making for emerging managers at all?
Kinga, we are entering in a long-term partnership where we need to build trust. So I think the due diligence takes the time it takes, really. And we have a public mission, so we have to be absolutely sure that when the funds are provided to an equity fund, that they are used for the purpose where our policymakers want it to be used. So we are difficult, I know, but once you have our commitment, we stand next to you. So
for many funds, actually.
For many funds. And in particular, when you talk about emerging fund managers and new funds coming on the markets, this is why EIF's role has always been a cornerstone investor in the European Union. We will remain a cornerstone investor. But there are also other, existing fund managers who try to make something new. And because of this new concept, that might be difficult to attract other investors, so not EIF. And then, of course, we will look into this as well, trying to be helpful, because still our mission is to continue supporting the venture capital markets in Europe, developing them further, taking this gender diversity dimension, for example, into it, taking into the sustainability dimension, climate dimension, and all this. So we will stay there, ready to support, as you stay as a public institution. That's our mission. Of course, part of our mission is linked to the mandates that we receive. So we receive our mandates from the European Commission, for example, European Union budget. This is why the continuation of this type of public European Union support to us, to other public institutions in the countries, is key. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure that all the policymakers have yet understood it, that how much dependence is in there, in fact, on the European Union budget.
Yes.
We need more support.
Absolutely. I agree with that. We need more support for deep tech. We need more support for diversity. And we need more involvement of the private sector, for sure. So as we look into the next 12 or 18 months, what can we do to bring more private sector to the discussion table, to fund VC, and to fund, of course, maybe a little bit more of diverse teams, but to bring them all with us on this journey? What do you think, Marjut?
I think we should take Uli around the table and let him explain the good performance of a venture capital over time. So venture capital needs time to make profits. And when we look at, for example, at the EIF's overall portfolio, what has been built up in the last 25 years, it can be very good, sustainable business. This message has to go more through also to the private sector, that pension funds, insurance companies, but you have to be patient or long-term, in the long term, really.
And in terms of Denmark, I think you have a couple of pension funds that are already investing.
Yes,
but it's a
minority. But if you are out there, we need more of you guys to get involved. And the easy way into venture capital is to go in at the mature end. And there will be several opportunities also pushed by us, nudged by us, maybe even led by us, where you can join the initiatives, and we need more growth capital, and certainly you identified some verticals that we need to focus on. So there are plenty of opportunities for private capital to come in. We know some of the very active private players in this part of the world, and I actually believe that and we are in constant dialogue with them. So we see an increase in interest of getting on board while at the same time, obviously, the market is somewhat fragile. So finding out, that balance is really what's going to happen, I believe, over the coming 12 months. But again, cautiously optimistic about even more private players coming into the ecosystem.
Europe has a lot of corporations, foundations, which are maybe less prone to these denominator effects. Is there anything that we can do to bring them to the table to discuss from the colleagues that you know? Maybe Thomas?
I actually think that quite a few people dipped their toes in venture in the last 5 years. I hear no one who is running away. I hear people who are putting their programs on pause, but I don't hear anyone that says this was completely nuts, I'm never doing this again. And that happened 20 plus years ago, right? So I think you're at a point in time where there's a lot of enthusiasm built up, a lot of bets placed. You're now in a period of recovery. But I'm actually quite optimistic about this. I think what the world maybe needs a little bit more is dedicated pockets of capital to take a little bit more risk, right? We have a special program for emerging managers. For us, that's funds 1, 2, and 3, where we say, yeah, but you don't have 20 years of track record. Maybe there's only 5 or 6. And there we need to understand what your role is in the context of a company, right? And so there you go a little bit deeper, try not to understand what's the governance necessarily and then it's more, okay, you are a person who wants to raise a fund or a couple or 2 or 3 people. What is it that makes you unique? There's always a gap in the market, right? And I think there's a need for more capital to be willing to take that little bit more risk. And if you look at historical numbers, you will see it time and time again, the small funds, the funds 1 and 2s, they're always the ones that perform best on average. So I think people underestimate the upside potential of those small funds and emerging firms and diverse teams. I think as the next few years go by, the track records of those types of teams will be cemented. And I think it'll be even more evidence that it's worth backing small emerging teams where you need to believe in more. But the hunger is there, the drive is there, and they're always going to find some way to drive a wedge into a market and carve out a position for themselves and build big firms after that.
Absolutely. I think the EIF motto is believe in small.
In fact, the EIF logo is in believe in small, but we should say we believe in courage, we believe in vision, because EIF is also nowadays dealing with infrastructure financing, infrastructure equity, so believe in small is, I think, no longer the right slogan, so we have to work on that. Any good ideas for a new slogan? Tell us. But believe in small, we also have to believe in the courage and vision, because as you know, in the European Union, we have the problem of fast-growing innovative companies who need financing. And in European Union, we have to make more efforts into this. We are doing our part in the EIF again. Others are certainly doing their part as well, but this is an area where we have to, in the European Union, we have to work more.
Absolutely. Any final word from you, Erik?
No, we are already today in lots of great partnerships with our friends at EIF, and we will certainly continue to do so. And the more we can play sort of a leading role and defining role and an inviting role, there's tons of opportunity out there. So it's an open invitation, really.
Brilliant. I'm really happy and honored to have you here, the three of you today. For European Women in VC, it's always an important moment to launch a big piece that we worked on for 9 months. But it's great to see the dedication and the commitment and the excitement that you have for European venture and startups. And very happy that all your institutions are so open to collaborate with emerging managers, smaller managers. I think this is a very important message to those out there to reach out with their projects at the right time.
Thank you, Kinga. I think there's one word we have to say: have courage. Go for it, have courage. All women. Yep.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and
Thanks.
thank you for coming to Copenhagen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kinga.